people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fucking fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. The current rank standings for the women's Ring IQ pound-for-pound list and how they are subject to change based on the outcomes of many upcoming bouts in the next few months.
Shields versus Marshall.
Set to go down in a little over a week's time. 2 weeks, give or take. You know, if Claressa Shields wins the fight, she retains that number 2 spot. She does.
She beats Savannah Marshall, takes her WBO title. That will be the 4th active reigning world champion she's defeated.
But that won't be enough for Claressa to advance to the number 1 spot ahead of Katie Taylor, because Katie Taylor's body of work, her quality of competition, far exceeds what Claressa has shown us so far. Every single alphabet title Katie Taylor's ever won, she won from a reigning champion.
Whereas many of the titles that Claressa Shields won from 168 to 154 pounds were vacant because no one was holding them.
In all actuality, Claressa has only faced 3 active reigning world champions in those 3 divisions, 168, 160, and 154. Nikki Adler, Christina Hammer, and Marie-Eve Dicaire. Savannah will be the 4th.
The 4th champion, the 4th reigning champion she will have fought. Katie Taylor, she's faced 5.
Anaí Sanchez for the WBA, Victoria Bustos for the IBF, Rose Vellante for the WBO, Delphine Persoon for the WBC, and Christina Lenardatu for the WBO up there at 140 pounds.
She's got to beat 5 championship scalps to 4 potentially if Claressa beats Savannah. You also have to factor in the other fighters that Katie Taylor has taken on that perhaps weren't champions then but are champions now.
Fighters like Jessica McCaskill, who after having dropped a decision to Katie Taylor, she went on to become a 2-division undisputed champion.
Fighters like Natasha Jonas, who Katie faced last year. She's a current reigning unified champion at junior middleweight.
Amanda Serrano, who Katie Taylor faced earlier this year, a pound-for-pound fighter in her own right, in her own respect, the current reigning unified featherweight champion who's just 1 belt away from becoming an undisputed champion. Katie Taylor's quality of competition far exceeds Claressa Shields. She's got a much stronger resume. So even if Claressa beats Savannah, that won't be enough for her to bump Katie down to number 2. Now, if Savannah wins, and it happens the other way,
she'll emerge in the bottom tier of the list and Claressa Shields will be bumped off.
If Savannah wins the fight, it'll be a monumental win for Savannah, but it will also be the only champion Savannah's actually taken a belt or belts from. When she won the WBO over a year ago, the title was vacant. She didn't actually have to beat a champion in order to be a champion. So even if she does beat Claressa Shields, that one victory doesn't give her the same resume or the same body of work that some of these other fighters have.
Several of these other fighters have been champions at multiple weights, beaten multiple champions and taken their belts from them, whereas for Savannah,
she's only been a champion at 1 weight, and if she beats Claressa, that will be the only champion she won a belt from.
She will emerge on the list, she will, but she won't emerge in the top 5. She'll emerge in the bottom tier, perhaps around number 7, maybe number 8.
Per the rules that govern the list, and defeating a pound-for-pound fighter, you become one yourself.
And the loser gets bumped off until such a time as they can get themselves back in the winner's bracket, more importantly, get themselves a belt so they can become a reigning champion again.
As this list is only for winners and only for champions per the rules that govern it. No fighter absent of a world title coming right off a loss is allowed to maintain a rank. The list is only for winners and only for champions. You think about the co-main event to that main event. Michaela Mayer versus Alicia Baumgartner. Michaela Mayer currently ranks in the number 6 spot on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. If she loses this thing, she's out. and Alicia will take her place.
That's if she loses. If she wins, she may end up advancing ahead of Senicia Estrada, who ranks in at number 5.
Two-division champion Senicia Estrada, who's beaten 2 active reigning world champions and taken their belts from them. If Michaela beats Alicia, that will be the 3rd world champion.
That'll be the 3rd world champion she's taken a belt from. She took the WBO from Eva Brutnitska, the IBF from Maiva Hamadouche, and if she beats Alicia, that makes 3.
She may advance to the number 5 spot ahead of Senicia Estrada. You think about November's upcoming fight between 2 pound-for-pound alums, Jessica McCaskill versus Chantel Cameron. The winner of the fight.
If Jessica wins, she'll have a credible argument to advance to the number 3 spot ahead of Amanda Serrano.
Chantel Cameron would be the 4th active reigning world champion that Jessica will have beaten. She beat Anaí Sanchez for the WBA, Erica Farias for the WBC, unbeaten Cecilia Brækhus for all the alphabet titles at 147 pounds at welterweight, set to move back down to junior welterweight. If she beats Chantel and takes her belts, that makes 4.
These are high-quality scalps. High-quality fighters.
That's what happens, what might happen if Jessica wins. If Chantel wins, well, Jessica gets bumped off the list and Chantel will gain considerable ground.
Don't forget that this is an undisputed junior welterweight title fight. All the belts are on the line. It appears that Kaylee Reese has vacated the remaining 2 alphabet titles.
Chantel wins this thing. Not only will she have beaten a pound-for-pound fighter on this list and bumped her off, but she will, in effect, become an undisputed champion herself, giving her enough of a credible argument that she could advance past Franchon Cruz, the super middleweight division's undisputed champion. And because both Jessica and Chantel are ranked on this list, whoever loses, it creates a vacancy that another fighter can occupy. That fighter could be Terry Harper, who has a very strong argument. She's a 2-division champion. That fighter could be Natasha Jonas, who has a strong argument as well.
These are just some things to look for and some changes that might take place, some movement on the list
set to go down in the next few weeks. In men's middleweight news, I'm sure that most of you have heard by now, per tweet from Michael Benson, Conor Benn has reportedly tested positive for clofamine in a VADA drug test ahead of his fight with Chris Eubank Jr. on Saturday night. Substance is on the WADA banned list. It's claimed Eubank Jr. still wants the fight to go ahead regardless.
Clofamine is a fertility drug in women and a testosterone booster in men, particularly athletes.
And in what is this evolving story, the British Boxing Board of Control issued a statement that reads, on the evening of the 4th of October this year, the board of the British Boxing Board of Control Limited resolved that the contest between Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn, scheduled to take place on the 8th of October, is prohibited, as it is not in the interests of boxing. That was communicated to the boxers and the promoters involved on the morning of the 5th of this month.
That's what they're saying now. That could change. This is an evolving story.
Eddie Hearn on the BBBofC prohibiting Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn. There's currently no reason in terms of violation or suspension that the fight should not take place. You're not going to suspend Conor Benn, so at some point the fight is going to take place.
And that's because regardless of what comes up on a VADA test,
the BBBofC doesn't work in tandem with VADA. They work in tandem with UCAD, and all of Conor Benn's test results via UCAD came up clean, came up clear. He's not in violation of any of UCAD's provisions, and the BBBofC work in tandem with UCAD, not VADA. This is not dissimilar from what we saw a few months ago between Oscar Valdez and Robson Conceição, to where he might have been in violation of VADA's banned list, but that local commission didn't work in tandem with VADA. They worked in tandem with WADA.
So that local commission allowed the fight to go ahead.
The British Boxing Board of Control seems to be taking a different stance. Chris Eubank Jr.'s promoter, Cale Sorland, has revealed that Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn spoke directly with one another after Benn tested positive for clomiphene. Following his conversation and medical advice, Eubank Jr. decided he's happy to still fight. Eddie Hearn is reportedly attempting to obtain a court injunction to allow Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn to proceed as planned on Saturday night after the BBBOC said the fight is prohibited as Benn tested positive for clomiphene.
Can they do that? Can they circumvent the BBBOC?
According to boxing scribe Gareth Davies, they can. UK Boxing Board of Control statement sent out 1,400 hours today. They are not sanctioning Eubank versus Benn. Promoters could find another group to sanction, as they once did for David Haye versus Derek Chisora under different circumstances.
I'm not going to get on some moral high horse when it comes to this thing, because as far as I'm concerned, the sport is rife with doping.
You're always hearing guys talk about how much they love Tyson Fury, for example, but Tyson Fury tested positive for nandrolone. You're always hearing old boxing guys like me that have been watching the sport for a very long time tell you about how much they love Roy Jones Jr., but Roy Jones Jr. tested positive for a banned substance years ago, 2001.
Here today you're talking about Oscar Valdez, John Pascal, Povetkin 2 times,
Lucas Brown 2 times, Luis Ortiz 2 times, Jarrell Miller 2 times, Dillian White.
Hell, even Canelo Alvarez tested positive for a banned substance once.
Ray Vargas, Luis Neri, trace amounts of clenbuterol, Alexander Povetkin, Ryan Martin,
Billy Joe Saunders.
Now listen, almost every time this happens, almost every time, without fail, there's a convenient explanation and a bundle of idiots that are willing to split hairs to make it sound good. I ain't on no moral high horse when it comes to this thing, because as far as I'm concerned, the sport is rife with doping. So let's not waste each other's time with the moral outrage here. All those guys I mentioned, all those guys, some of which might be your favorites, all those guys I mentioned that have tested positive for a banned substance, and those who haven't,
Those who I haven't mentioned, but tested positive for a banned substance nonetheless.
and those who are using banned substances, but put simply, they just haven't been caught. They haven't been brought to the light of day. It's kind of obvious that the sport is rife with this stuff.
So let's just can the virtue signal in here.
Let's not waste each other's time with that stuff and the moral outrage that some might express at the idea that an athlete, a boxer, is taking a banned substance. Yeah, there are a lot of boxers that take banned substances, all right?
Some that you might like.
The real question here is, should the contest be allowed to go on?
The ongoing process now with the investigation, it's a difficult situation for the board, because the board do not acknowledge VADA testing. You remember when Billy Joe Saunders tested positive for VADA, he was banned by the Massachusetts Commission. The board did not suspend him or ban him because they don't acknowledge VADA. They only acknowledge UCAD, of which Conor Benn has had multiple testing for this fight, and it's all been negative. So there's a lot to digest and go through, and right now, obviously, the legal teams are speaking with the board. They have to be comfortable as well to obviously sanction the fight, and we'll see how it unfolds.
If the British Boxing Board of Control works in tandem with UCAD and only recognizes their findings, then the show must go on. And it really is that simple. They don't work in tandem with VADA, they work in tandem with UCAD. Conor Benn has since spoken out saying, "I've not committed any violations, I've not been suspended, so as far as I'm concerned, the fight's still going ahead. I've spoken to Chris Eubank Jr. personally, and we both want to go ahead. I've signed up to every voluntary anti-doping testing there is. I've never had any issues before, so my team will find out why there's been an initial adverse finding in my test. I'm a clean athlete, and we'll get to the bottom of this. Do you believe him?"
Fuck no.
No, I don't believe anybody in this situation, though if I'm being honest, I'm not morally outraged about it either, because this is tell-dem age in the sport of boxing. Happens all the time, and everybody's got a convenient story, a convenient excuse.
The morality of it doesn't even come into it. What's important is whether or not the contest should be allowed to go on.
And I say yes. I say it should. Because if the BBBOC works in tandem with UCAD, and UCAD didn't find anything,
There's no violation.
yet another bombshell in association with this entire situation. Eddie Hearn on the BBBOC prohibiting Eubank versus Benn, bearing in mind what's happened during the last week or so, the board were aware. This seems like a funny time to move forward with that ruling when they've known for some time. And if they've known for some time. Why would they pick now to prohibit the match?
Did they sit on this news and time their response, time their ruling?
Did they do this deliberately as to make things difficult for Matchroom? Make it difficult for the show to go on? Was it the BBBOC's intention to catch Matchroom with their pants down at what is the most inopportune time to try to move forward with the show? Because if they knew about this news ahead of this week, they could have made their ruling then.
They chose to do it now, just days out from the fight.
And I won't bore you with the virtue signaling or the moral outrage. Eddie Hearn will seem somewhat of a hypocrite to a lot of people because he pulled Joshua Buatsi out of that Pascal fight in reference to Pascal's adverse findings. But he seems to take a different stance when it comes to his own fighter. When it comes to his own fighter who tested positive for a banned substance, Conor Benn.
Oh yeah, he's a hypocrite. He's a hypocrite for that, but you could spit in the wind and hit a hypocrite in the sport of boxing.
The real question here is whether or not the fight should be allowed to go on. And if all of Conor Benn's tests by way of UCAT came out clean and clear, and the BBBOC adheres to what UCAT finds, their provisions and their violations or the lack thereof, if all of that is clean and clear, then the show should, in theory, be allowed to go on, because it's not dissimilar from what we saw with Oscar Valdez and Robson Conceição. In that situation, the commission chose to abide by...
They chose to abide by the provisions of the anti-doping agency they actually work with.
The anti-doping agency they actually recognize, more or less. And
the damage is done anyway. The damage to Conor's reputation. This is a stain that won't wash out.
you know how it goes. This is the kind of thing that's going to get brought up whatever he goes on to do in what remains of his boxing career. This is a stain that won't wash out. This is something that will follow him and haunt him the rest of his days as a boxer. That's the routine. Whether he wins on Saturday or loses, or the fight doesn't go through at all, the damage to his reputation is done.
As far as myself, as a consumer, a connoisseur of the sport, I'm pretty blasé about it at this point.
I'm desensitized. I am indifferent. And the reason for it is because a lot of times the sport itself seems complicit with these kinds of practices. They leave the door open for this stuff to happen. They may be outraged in the moment. The moment news breaks that a fighter tests positive for a banned substance, and that's when the outrage is most potent. But that's not when...
It's what you're doing between the time one guy tests positive and another guy tests positive.
It's what's happening then that counts the most. Do people really want a clean sport when they're celebrating athletes like Tyson Fury, who tested positive for nandrolone? Nostalgic old guys who think of Roy Jones Jr. as one of the best who ever did it, even though he tested positive for a banned substance? And the innumerable number of boxers here today that are still testing positive for banned substances. Does the sport and those who take it in, do they really want a clean sport?
Are they only outraged when a matchroom fighter is involved, or when the fighter involved isn't one of their personal favorites? What are we really dealing with here?
I've grown cynical over time because this ain't my first rodeo. This ain't the first time a big fight, a really big fight, has a performance-enhancing drug scandal tacked onto it.
So pardon me if I don't lose my mind over this thing.
Shit happens.